Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Scott Luton and the one and only Kevin L. Jackson with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. Kevin, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Today's show is going to be great. We're going to talk about cybersecurity. I love cybersecurity. And it's going to be, we're really going to start helping people get ready for 2023. These business leaders, where they focus on what is your resolutions for the new year? What are your 5 cybersecurity resolutions or priorities as a manufacturer in 2023?
That is right. And of course, cybersecurity, one of the biggest topics of our time, whether you're in global supply chain or certainly manufacturing, which is going to be a big focus here today, or global business. So it should be a great episode. Kevin, we should add that today's episode is presented by our good friends at Microsoft. We're going to be touching on some of the really big things that they're doing in industry, including the world of manufacturing, a little later on.
Absolutely.
All right, so Kevin, are you ready to introduce our guests here today?
Yes.
Well, I am too. And so with no further ado, I want to welcome in our 2 featured guests, Karen Braxton, Vice President with Technogen Cybersecurity LLC. Karen, how you doing?
I'm well, thank you. How are you, Scott and Kevin?
Doing wonderful. Yeah. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. And you're joined by Bruce Spector, Chairman of the Board with Baltimore Cyber Range LLC. Bruce, how you doing?
Very, very well. Welcome. Thank you for having us.
You bet. Really enjoyed the pre-show conversation. Kevin, what were you saying?
Yeah, I got an opportunity to visit the Baltimore Cyber Range a while ago, and they've actually improved since I did. But they were really impressive. They were so good that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia asked me to go evaluate them as a benchmark for their national cybersecurity standards. Wow.
Bruce, that is some high praise, huh?
It sure is, and I remember that, and it's very, very exciting for us.
Well, we're going to learn a lot more about both your organization and Technogen and what Karen's been up to here momentarily. But hey, Kevin and Karen and Bruce, before we do that, in great tradition we've had here at Supply Chain Now and Digital Transformers, with the award-winning podcast Kevin has been leading, we like to get to know our guests a little better. And we like to start with this very simple question of where you grew up. So you got to give us the goods on your upbringing. And Karen, I want to start with you. So tell us, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Carroll County, Maryland, a little small town called Westminster. Most people haven't heard of, unless you're local, in the country. And went to schools out there, very close to Pennsylvania, actually. You could go out through our front yard, across the mailbox, and be in PA, a couple of steps through the woods.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's right there on the Mason-Dixon.
Okay. So let me ask you this, because we love talking food here at Supply Chain Now. Kevin, love talking all the time. Sometimes we get to business. But what is one food dish growing up there in Westminster that's inseparable from your upbringinging?
My macaroni and cheese. My mom's macaroni and cheese.
Wonderful. And, folks, y'all, our listeners didn't have the great opportunity to be a part of our pre-show conversation. But as we learned from Karen, that mac and cheese she just spoke of, she's legendary in her family now for cooking that and many other dishes at holidays and cookouts, you name it. So, Karen, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that.
I'm sure she probably still has,
Bruce.
Well, maybe not. I'm sure she put together a huge pot for Thanksgiving. It probably was all gone before midnight.
All right, no fair. You can't make us hungry now. It's not fair. It's still around midday here in the Metro Atlanta area. All right, so Bruce, that's gonna be tough to top. But what about you? Where'd you grow up?
So I was born in Baltimore. I went to grade school in Baltimore, high school in Baltimore, college in Baltimore, raised my kids in Baltimore. And as John Mellencamp would say, they'll probably bury me in Baltimore. And there's only one thing worse than somebody born in Baltimore is somebody that likes being from Baltimore because they praise it. And I got to tell you, it's a wonderful city. Wonderful.
Well, so let me ask you then. Kevin and I are both big sports fans. We're talking on sports pre-show too, sports and food.
Oh, by the way,
and of course,
who beat the Falcons this weekend? Who beat the Falcons this weekend? I'm just saying.
Kevin, that's a long list. That's a long list of who beat the Falcons this season. So, that's not fair. But, yes, Kevin's Washington Commanders did beat the Atlanta Falcons. But let's talk. What is your favorite sports team growing up, Bruce? What was one team or a sport?
So that's a great question. I really don't want to show my age, all right? But I am a Ravens fan through and through. But I used to root for two teams. I would root for the Ravens or anybody that was playing the Indianapolis Colts, because the Indianapolis Colts should be the Baltimore Colts. But other than that, I'm a Ravens fan through and through.
Yeah, when they snuck out of the city in buses at midnight, the Colts.
Everybody remembers that. How about that? Yeah.
I remember the Mayflower van lines pulled up in the middle of the night when they promised the mayor they were going to keep us here. So I don't know.
We're going to have
I got a bad feeling towards those guys.
Bruce and Kevin and Karen, we're going to have to dedicate a whole series to that story because that's really a fascinating saga back in the day. Well, hey, Karen and Bruce, I'm so pleased to have you here. Kevin, quick comment from you. Westminster and Baltimore proper. Kevin, you're in that greater neck of the woods. Any comments on Karen and Bruce's upbringing?
Well, both my parents were born and raised in Baltimore, so my extended family is all around there. And I just a little inside bit of knowledge. Karen is actually my cousin.
Really? Again?
So that's a prime example. It's not Baltimore. It's Small-Timor. It's a small town. It's a small, big town. Everybody knows everybody else. Really, it's great.
I'm a perfect
example.
I'm 10 minutes away from Kevin's dad.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, blessed be the ties that bind, number one. But number two, Kevin, you've done this to me twice now. We had a guest, a veteran aviator, right, with the Marines. And Kevin was messing around and was calling her cousin. And I thought that he was just like messing around. And during the show, he's like, "Really, Scott? I told you she's my cousin. She's my cousin." And we had a nice little moment there. But anyway, well, again, great to have y'all. Let's kind of shift gears here, and let's talk about what you and your organizations are doing. And Karen, I want to start with you. Tell us about Technogen and what the company does and your role.
Okay. Technogen Cyber, we provide cybersecurity services. We also have a LMS. Part of the company is Technogen Academy, where we do cyber training. And we're going to be actually working with Baltimore Cyber Range next year on a project providing training, incumbent training. The other part of Technogen is staffing. We do staff aug, and not just for IT, but right now we're actually even helping out a college located in Laurel, one of the cyber schools that's our partner, and we're going to be doing some recruiting for them as well. Technogen
the demand is just off the chart, Karen.
Yeah.
for all things technical talent, right?
How about that? We're a wholly owned subsidiary of Technogen Inc. Technogen Cyber is incepted in 2009. We are also building out zero trust model. We're excited. We're working with one of our board members, Dr. Ron Martin, who's also affiliated with the university. So we're partnered with them and going to be doing some lab work as well in the cyber facility there. Technogen also is, what word do I want to use? Let's just say we're going to be in the EDU space soon, and we'll be making an announcement on the website about that as well.
Man,
but excited.
I love how you're touching sounds like so many different aspects of the technology ecosystem. Kevin, your quick comment on Technogen and what Karen's sharing.
Well, actually, Technogen and Baltimore Cyber are really important in the cybersecurity ecosystem for the state of Maryland. I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of that, but that's why they seem to be sort of doing everything in the middle of everything, is because they're so important to the ecosystem.
It's like the mayors. The mayors of Cybersecurity Nation. I don't know. All right, so Bruce, let's talk about Baltimore Cyber. Beyond some of the cool things that Kevin shared on the front end, tell us about what the organization does and what you do.
Sure. So Baltimore Cyber, we're a bunch of electrical engineers and computer scientists from Johns Hopkins and University of Maryland, both Baltimore educational facilities. And we actually accompanied Governor Hogan on his trade mission to Israel back in 2016. And it was an economic development mission. And the Israelis see a lot of cyber threats in that part of the world. They've got, some hostilities there in the Middle East between Iran and Syria and Jordan and that general vicinity. So what they do is they actually store the threats they receive, they catalog them, they library them, and they create what they call an attack generator. They then take that data and they run it against a simulated network, and they use it as an instructional tool to teach their cyber warriors how to deal with the threats that are current threats. So the governor had this idea that, that's great for cyber warriors, but I'm sure we're doing good stuff in the United States. But why don't we take this device, this system, and put it in Baltimore, and let's do workforce development. There's over 25,000 unfilled positions in Maryland that if people were trained properly, they could be walk into positions currently. And then that's an order of magnitude higher if they have government clearances, because the majority or lion's share of the cybersecurity stuff that's hot right now requires government clearances. So we put the range in Baltimore, and we trained, in the last 5 years, we've trained about 1,000 people that were not cybersecurity types. And we got about 950 of those full-time positions in cyber. And the reason we were able to do that was it was a unique training session, but we also formed a consortium of cyber companies that have the requirements, and they gave us the materials that we needed to do the training. They taught us the threats that we were going to use to put them on the range, and that's how we applied it to workforce development.
Man, I love that. Even in this highly technological and ever-evolving, innovative world, man, workforce is where it's at. So I love that story and that element. Kevin, your quick comment on what Bruce just shared.
There's just a huge shortage of cybersecurity professionals globally, not just in Maryland, but nationally in the United States and globally. So Baltimore Cyber is really filling a critical niche for our entire society as we transition to the Internet of Things. I mean, our society is built on the Internet, and security of our devices, of our network, our computers, our smartphones. This is our life, right? So thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing, Bruce.
Definitely. I appreciate that, Bruce and Karen. And now that we've kind of level set with who our guests are, one of my favorite parts, and then what they're doing professionally and the impact they're making. And we're about to get some of their expertise on, again, the top 5 priorities that manufacturing leaders really need to prepare for when it comes to cybersecurity for 2023. But before we get there, Kevin, I think you and the research department have been diving into some important market facts. Tell us more, especially when it comes to Maryland and manufacturing and cyber.
When you say manufacturing, many people probably don't think Maryland, right? It's a small state. It's overshadowed by its proximity to the nation's capital. But manufacturers in Maryland account for almost 6% of the total output of the state, and employs about over 4% of the workforce. So you can see manufacturing is important. In 2019, there was almost $25 billion in manufacturing output from the state. The state averages about 110,000 manufacturing employees. and they each make about $91,000 each. So I'll take that job. In Maryland's economy, there's like $10.3 billion in manufactured goods that are actually exported in 2020. And $3 billion of that goes to our free trade agreement partners. These are countries that have partnered with the United States, and it helps create like 13% of the state's employment is from exports, and small businesses comprise 88% of all exporters in Maryland. So this is not about big business. It's about small business. And those partners, and I'm talking about countries like Australia, Bahrain, Canada, Chile, Guatemala, Morocco, Singapore, South Korea, they did almost $660 billion in manufactured goods alone. And I know that we're going to be talking a lot about cybersecurity, but from a cybersecurity point of view, Maryland ranked number 1 in the Cyber States Diversity Index, number 2 in cybersecurity technology and innovation. It ranks number 1 in federal obligations, and I'm talking about money for cybersecurity research and development. And it's ranked as a top 10 global cybersecurity hub. And don't forget, the National Security Agency, one of those 3-letter agencies, the NSA, is located in Fort Meade, Maryland, just south of Baltimore and just north of the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. So if you want to be the hub of cybersecurity, Maryland is where it's at.
Kevin, I really appreciate that. I feel like I've gotten a certification in all things manufacturing and technology and cyber, and of course, Maryland in the last few minutes. But Karen, what's the thought that comes to your mind after some of the data that Kevin just shared?
Well, like I just said, it was great facts that he had brought forth, and the numbers are mind-boggling. But yes, we are definitely the cyber hub here, which is why we're going to be instrumental in helping to train up a lot of the state employees in cyber and the incumbents.
So well said. And, it's only going to get the cyber threat, as y'all know, speaking to the experts here, all three of y'all, is only going to get more complex and more, a lot more attacks. I mean, every business, regardless if you're in supply chain or else, is going to be a big concern, big priority to tackle. Bruce, what about you? Kevin just shared a ton of market data. Your thought?
Yeah, so I think Kevin's obviously got the numbers and he understands the what we call the cybersecurity ecosystem in Maryland. One of the things that strikes me and some of my colleagues as not obvious is that when you look at these opportunities and these people that are working not only in the supply side but in IT, in Maryland there's over 800,000 IT employees. People lose sight of the fact that if you have that cybersecurity is an esoteric subset of IT. You need to be an expert in IT before you can really attack a cyber issue. It's like being a doctor. You have to be a doctor before you can be a cardiologist. So it's a specialty within. And that's one of the reasons that there is so much need for cybersecurity training. You need to understand, there's so many different IT systems out there, and there's so much doing in new technologies and new ways of approaching. I mean, look, you take an IT system. You take something like a microprocessor, which I'm sure most of your people know. It's basically the building block of a network or of an IT device. That offers tremendous automation and tremendous progress. However, there's a dark side. That microprocessor can be compromised. Bad guys can get a hold of it and take over your system. That is the issue with cybersecurity. there are more and more microprocessors going into these things. Your things that were never microprocessor based. Your home heating, your thermostat, your car, your TV. I mean, things that you need to live with. Some of your medical delivery systems are all microprocessor based.
Right.
These things are all very, very susceptible to bad guys hacking in. And if there's a money profit, they said why do you rob banks? Because it's where the money is.
Yeah.
If you can find a way to get into these systems, you find a way to make money.
I think the word
evidently that's what they say
is vulnerability. The vulnerability of all these systems.
That's right. And they're probing and they're looking and
what doesn't have a microprocessor in it?
Right. Well, as Bruce was sharing that, Kevin, one of the first thoughts coming to my mind is that dual side. That both sides of the sword when it comes to innovative and highly powerful and ever more powerful technology. Any any great tools in bad actors' hands can unfortunately do a lot of damage. So that all the more reason to get into some of these priorities we're going to be talking about when it comes to cyber. But hey, Kevin and Bruce and Karen, before we get into kind of the center plate part of our conversation, I want to share, I think as four of us spoke about pre-show, Gartner Research has once again reported that CIOs plan to make cybersecurity their top investment priority in 2023, beating out spending on things like business intelligence and analytics, and even, sorry, Kevin, even cloud computing platforms, right?
To my
heart. As Bruce and Kevin and Karen spoke to pre-show, that's what they're saying. We'll see if the time and the money comes with it. But Leslie Salmon had a great quote in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago. She's a global chief information officer for Kellogg, right? Mm-hmm. She was quoted as saying, "If I get a budget challenge, it doesn't come out of cyber." So we'll see in the new year. Okay, so with that backdrop, let's dive into some of the cybersecurity priorities, the top 5, we'll call it, cybersecurity priorities for manufacturing leaders as we head into 2023. So, Karen, let's start with you. What are 2 priorities that manufacturing leaders really should be considering?
I believe number 1, first one should be the manufacturing systems. They need to take a look and have a holistic approach to cybersecurity, right? They're not doing that now across the board. And number 2, I believe they need to establish and enforce policies and procedures. We got standards, you have compliance, you have regulatory, items. So I think once that stuff's done and it's done across the board through academia, government, they should consider this. Should be considering if they're not.
I'm really happy that you start off with those 2 items because all too often cybersecurity has been a bolt-on, right? It's something you do after you finish everything else. And you can't take a holistic approach unless you think about how cybersecurity is linked to everything else. And then these organizations must put in policies and procedures, but more important than putting in the procedures, they have to enforce those procedures. I mean, too much lip service into what we should do.
Yeah, we can't enough lip service leadership, right? It's all about deeds, not words.
Good point, Kevin. A lot of they're even doing that with some of the smaller subsets in the government, where they're saying that they're going to have their budgets set aside to improve the security measures and do different things for risk assessments and risk management. But it seems like it's not getting done. The hackers are still getting through.
Yeah.
Well, so Bruce, with those first 2 priorities that Karen mentioned, more holistic approach and establishing and enforcing. Your thoughts, Bruce?
So let me take them sequentially. Let's talk about holistic. Let's explain what holistic really means in the cyber world. From 100,000 feet, it's a lot better to design cybersecurity systems in from the start than to retrofit. So if you're going to put a system in, a new network, you should be thinking about how you're going to address cybersecurity. How are you going to mitigate? How are you going to detect? How are you going to remediate? How are you going to do the things that cyber people need to do to that system? And that starts with making sure your software guys are aware of the issues, making sure your hardware guys are, making sure your operators are aware, making sure you have plans and systems in place. And it takes a unique understanding of your security profile, what you have and what you need. And that takes time, and you need to have your systems assessed as to what your vulnerabilities are. And that's what I think we mean by being holistic. And I couldn't agree more with Karen. I think that's probably, if I were in the supply side right now, that's the thing I would be most worried about. But if in 2023, you're going to start to see something else, and this talks to the second topic, you're going to see the U.S. government get a lot more involved in the regulatory side of cyber, because the government's starting to realize some of the issues. I mean, look at Colonial Pipeline. You had gas lines because you had a breach in cyber that was completely preventable. And we'll talk about that in a little while. But if you look at what the government's going to do, I know Baltimore Cyber currently, we actually provide the proficiency testing for government assessors to assure that the clouds are safe for government data. So if you're an assessor and you're going to determine whether Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or any of the major cloud systems can hold government data, they have to be assessed by the government to meet certain minimum requirements. These requirements are dictated by NIST, the National Institute of Standards. So that requirement is just for clouds. Now, that's a relatively small subset of the IT world. Now, there's this new board that's come out that if I were in the supply side, I would want to know about this. It's called CMMC. It's a Cybersecurity Maturation Model Certification. What CMMC is going to do is by 2025, if you are a U.S. government DoD contractor making anything, be it guns, butter, or IT systems, you're going to have to be deemed that you know what you're doing in cyber, or you will not be able to get a government contract. Now, if you are an executive in the supply side or supply chain, I think it behooves you to understand what that is. And it's going to cost you money, and you're going to have to spend some time on getting your staff trained. But it's something that's going to be necessary for you to do business. Yep. And if you don't pay attention to that, it's going to be very, very expensive down the road, because you're going to be frozen out of opportunities that you won't be able to bid because you're not going to be qualified to go after that work. So that's where I think it's a very major thing. If I were on the supply side, I would look at that as closely as possible.
Bruce, that's a great call out. That CMMC is something. Yeah. Allison Giddens, one of our hosts here at Supply Chain Now, has spoken a lot about and has been involved in kind of the community that's proliferating that. Because to your point, if you're making parts for F-22s for the Air Force, right? We got to secure those supply chains, right?
Would you want would you want somebody like a rogue nation to get a hold of our nuclear weapons? I mean, of course you don't. I mean, right. And that you have to have some minimum level of standard. Right now, it's the Wild West. Right. I mean, there really aren't many standards that are being enforced. My hat's off to the U.S. government. It's about time we did something like this. And I think the world needs to do more of this internationally, because there's a lot of bad things that can happen with cyber, and we've only hit the tip of the iceberg. Absolutely, the tip.
And this isn't
so, Kevin, let's get you to weigh in here before we continue. Yeah,
this isn't philosophical, right? They built the F-22 and found out after they were building that there were actually Chinese components in it. And I'm sure you've heard about Huawei and the fact that many of our rural telecommunications infrastructure use Huawei equipment. And one of the biggest, concerns is that the equipment has cybersecurity backdoors in it, which has led the U.S. federal government to actually fund a rip out and replace of all Huawei gear in the United States. And this is because of cybersecurity concerns.
And that's a sophisticated threat. And I think that's a good example of what, regulatory bodies could do to help by making sure these backdoors don't exist. But it's even more basic than that. And I keep going back to Colonial Pipeline because this is not classified and it's open and there's data. The bad guys shut down Colonial Pipeline for months. And the reason it was determined that the systems were shut down was because a live set of credentials were available on the dark web. Now, that is beyond belief that an organization like Colonial Pipeline could be shut down because somebody bought a username and a password and was able to get into the system and introduce ransomware.
That's scary.
That's the kind of thing that regulatory operations like CMMC and things along those lines could stop. Because CMMC says, look, you need to make sure that these credentials are controlled. They have conditions that are actually documented in paperwork that you assign and agree to do.
Yep. That's
kind of the direction we're going in. And if I were an executive in the supply side, I would want to be looking at that very closely.
All right. So let me jump in here. So a lot of great discussion, and I love the passion and the expertise between all three of y'all. So Karen laid out the first two priorities, right? The first one being all new manufacturing systems need to take that holistic approach to cyber, and then number two, need to establish and enforce policies and procedures. Bruce, I want to keep driving with your two priorities as we continue to build out this top 5 list.
So yeah, I think that there, and this almost sounds trivial to state, but you need to be aware of the threats that exist in your industry. Every organization has a security profile. It's very unlikely that if you're making popcorn, that the Russians are going to be interested in what you're doing. So you probably don't need to get to the level of a security profile that you would have if you were handling top secret or classified data. But by the same token, it's possible that there's somebody around the corner that knows you guys are making money, and maybe if we didn't let you get to your records, maybe you'll give me some of that money. So you want to make sure you understand how those threats operate. It's an interesting comment for our viewers. There's about 8,500 known cyber threats. They live in a database. It's called the Metasploit database, and we know what they are. And somewhere close to 95% of all instances of cyber are repeat offenses. They're not what we call 0 day. 0 day is stuff that's new. It's never happened before. 0 day stuff tends to be from nation states. So it's unlike a small guy is going to be hit by a zero day threat, but it's very likely that he'll be hit with something that's known. So if you know the threats that are out there and you build the defenses to deal with it and you have a plan to remediate and detect that, you most likely will not be a victim. So those are the things I would say. I think that the executives and the people that are running these supply side organizations should really look at what their threats are, what their security profile is, and what's a good tack to address that threat.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing we talked about was an actual plan to detect, mitigate, and remediate. I throw those words out very quickly because cyber people, that's what we do. We detect, we mitigate, and remediate threats. At the end of the day, that we're all part of that function. And you as a business entity or a manufacturing entity or a supply side entity need to have some way of doing that. And it's not that difficult. There are professionals out there that can help you. There's risk assessors. They can do gap analysis. You should look at that and you should come up with some way to do that. It's quite possible, and I'm pretty sure it's coming, that over the next few years, you're going to be required to do that to be in business. So if you can get a jump start on that, you'll be helping get yourself ready for the future, and you'll make yourself safer.
All right. So Bruce, you shared really of our top 5 list items number 3 and 4. Number 3, manufacturers need to understand their cybersecurity profile, current standards, and regulatory requirements. And number 4, folks, you got to be aware of the threats that not only exist in your industry, but you also have to have a plan to detect, mitigate, and remediate all cyber threats, right? So before we get to number 5, Kevin, I want to get Karen and you a chance to weigh in. So Karen, that is, man, I've got, by my count, we've got 7 full plates of things we've got to do already. Karen, weigh in.
How about that? Yeah. Good points, Bruce. And I think too, a lot of the manufacturers that are out there, we were talking about policy and compliance, and we have NIST that's there. We have got CISA, Cloud Security Alliance, and Bruce had mentioned about CMMC. I think 2.0 is coming out next year. At any rate, overall, yeah, I think if the businesses understand their profile, understand their infrastructure, and protect it, can you imagine if everyone had a SOC? Okay, or we all, implemented zero trust software. Not allowing anybody in. Bruce was talking about the pipeline, the Columbia pipeline, and had they had some other type of identity credentials, multi-factor, maybe 3 or 4 ways to log in, even if the credentials were found on the dark web, possibly they wouldn't have been hacked because the person wouldn't have been able to get in if they didn't have a fingerprint or iris scan or something like that. So,
yeah.
Okay. Thank
Great
you.
point.
Yeah, definitely good stuff there, Karen. I'm going to have to go to the thesaurus and look up all these acronyms after today's show because you are bringing it.
I do that.
No, it's good. Being a veteran and being in supply chain, hey, we love our acronyms, so I really appreciate it. Just having a little fun. Okay, so Kevin, before you get to number 5, weigh in on what Bruce really was sharing with numbers 3 and 4 there.
Well, one thing Bruce talked about was a cybersecurity profile. That's very important and it's very critical, but we also have to remember that a lot of this is new. Think about social media. How does your organization view social media? Is it a cybersecurity threat? Well, when you think about the fact that TikTok is owned by Chinese and that there are fears that TikTok is collecting personal information that's being sent to Beijing, could that be a problem for your company? So it's not a narrow or esoteric thing, right? Everyone is using social media. How does that fit into your cybersecurity plans? What is the threat to your organization? How do you remediate the cybersecurity threat from social media?
Yeah, great point there. And just a little play on what Bruce said earlier. He talked about if you ask bank robbers, why'd you rob the bank? That's where the money is. Well, you can ask hackers, why'd you take that personal data? Because that's where the money is. To your point, Kevin.
Yeah.
Little play there.
Because
So
you can.
Yeah. You'll get some bonuses on that IP usage there, Bruce. I'll get miles and miles out of that. Okay. So Kevin, we're building a very healthy top 5 list of cybersecurity priorities that manufacturing leaders in particular need to take into consideration for 2023. You're the home run hitter, so bring in number 5 here.
Well, we've been focusing on what the company needs to do for itself, how to protect itself, what its own regulations, its own policies. But these organizations are doing business, and they don't do business alone. They have partners that they work with. They also are selling products and services to customers and maybe other companies. So from a cybersecurity point of view, you're operating in an ecosystem also that parallels your business ecosystem. So I think number 5 is protect your cybersecurity ecosystem. Know the policies and plans of your partners, because that is a gateway to your network.
Well said, Kevin. I love that, protecting that digital ecosystem. Karen, your thoughts on the 5th priority there?
Very important, Kevin. As we were talking about the ecosystem, And you do have to know it. You have to understand it, or otherwise you aren't going to be able to protect your data, right? So I think businesses and industry as well need to really hone in on that.
Yeah, great point. We need a digital version of Captain Planet for the digital ecosystem, perhaps. I don't know. Bruce, your thoughts on number 5?
I could not agree more, and I think it was very astute of Kevin to point that out. And I think a natural derivative of that is that you have phenomenal teamwork between primes and subs and sub-subs. And you certainly, as a subcontractor, don't want to bring your prime down because you screwed up on a cyber basis. So I think you're going to find that there's going to be a lot of not only having to have that, but it's going to be required by your customer. If you're a subcontractor and you've got to meet a certain standard to meet cyber requirements, he's not going to do business with you unless he knows you're not going to cause him problems. So I think it all works in the same vein.
Well said, Bruce. Appreciate that. And Bruce and Karen, don't go anywhere. We're going to find out. We're going to make sure our listeners know how to connect with you both here as we start to wrap up today's episode. Now, Kevin, before we do that, of course, today's episode is presented in partnership with our friends at Microsoft, who's been up to some really cool things in the industry here lately, right?
Right, absolutely. And when you're talking about manufacturing and technology, there's actually two sides of the house. You have information technology, or IT, and operational technology, or OT. And historically, they've never talked to one another. They've stayed on both sides of the house with a big wall between them. And that's great if you want to get hacked, if you want to get attacked, if you're not interested in protecting your cybersecurity. And that's why Microsoft is really focused on strengthening IT and OT security for manufacturers in order to prevent plant downtime. They now offer agentless IT and OT security monitoring with Azure Defender. This is really tightly integrated with the Azure Sentinel, which is the cloud-based security solution that provides SIEM, or security information and event management, and SOAR, the security orchestration and automated response services in the Azure public cloud. That combination really provides a single solution for alert detection, threat visibility, and proactive hunting and threat response. And based on the anomaly detection technology that was acquired via a CyberX, the solution has been deployed in some of the world's largest and most diverse industrial environments, including Global 2000 firms in manufacturing, chemicals, and pharmaceutical. It secures greenfield as well as brownfield and proprietary IT and OT devices, including those that may run older versions of Windows that can't be easily upgraded. It can also be deployed either on-premise or in the cloud. So Microsoft is really doing a lot in this area.
Agreed. And of course, recently they announced the launch of Microsoft Supply Chain Center, which is piloted by some of the most well-recognized companies, including Kraft Heinz North America, which has been using it to increase organizational agility, amongst other things. So good stuff there. Thank you for sharing. And big thanks to our friends at Microsoft. Okay, so Karen and Bruce, I have learned a ton from both of y'all, and I've really enjoyed. I wish we could publish the pre-show as a podcast, and then of course this whole episode. But we'll save that for later. Karen, how can folks connect with you and the team at Technogen?
Well, we have a LinkedIn page. They can reach me on LinkedIn just by searching my name, and we also have a company page as well on LinkedIn. And we have a website, of course. The Academy is there too. There's a link to that site, and it's www.technogencyber.com, the website.
It's just that easy. And of course, we'll include those links in the episode page, so our listeners will be just one click away. Karen Braxton, really have enjoyed your perspective here today. Bruce, how can folks connect with you in the Baltimore Cyber Range?
So, and we also are heavily on LinkedIn. You can certainly look up me, Bruce Spector, or the Baltimore Cyber Range at the page. And we have a fairly extensive website. It's www.baltimorecyberrange.com. And most of our programs are available at no cost. We do it as a public service. We're a state contractor, so we would love to have your feedback. We'd love to get you involved, and we could get you more information on what we do if you're interested.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Bruce, and big congrats to both you and Karen, your respective organizations, for the growth and all the success you're having and the difference you're making in light as we continue going down the road of this exciting digital era, warts and all, preparing industry for that. Okay, so before we wrap here, Kevin, speaking of growth and success, love what you've been doing amongst other things, but especially with digital transformers. So, Kevin, how can folks lean into that and connect with you?
Well, actually, what you can do is listen to our most recent show that was just dropped yesterday. And its title is State Government and Cybersecurity. Like we planned it. I actually had the opportunity to interview Ms. Cetrice Mosley Romero, and she's the director of the Indiana Security Council. So they're really attacking all of the cybersecurity concerns for the state of Indiana. I tell you, Indiana and Maryland need to get together. So that's
how about that?
You can download that on from your favorite podcast channel, or you can go to Supply Chain Now and Cybersecurity, and you can always check me out on LinkedIn.
That's right. You don't want to miss that. 3 power heavy hitters here. Great discussion here as we're talking about the 5 top priorities, especially when it comes to cybersecurity, that manufacturing leaders gotta take in consideration as we move into 2023. So big thanks to Karen Braxton, Vice President with Technogen Cybersecurity. Karen, thanks so much for carving out the time.
And I want to thank you, Scott and Kevin, and thanks to Microsoft for sponsoring the show.
That's right. Bruce Spector, Chairman of the Board with the Baltimore Cyber Range. Bruce, really enjoyed your perspective as well.
Thank you for having me, and keep up the good work. You guys do a great job.
Thank you so much, Bruce. And we'll be thinking, hey, Smaltimore. I'm going to steal that from you and Karen as well. Really enjoyed that.
That's not copyrighted, so feel free to use any way you like.
Okay. Kevin L. Jackson, the one and only host of Digital Transformers and so much more. Sir. Kevin, always a pleasure to knock out these conversations with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Scott.
All right, so big thanks to our guests. But listeners, it's all about deeds, not words. You got to take action with these expert insights and perspective as we get ready for the new year. But hey, regardless, hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. As we sign off here, Scott Luton challenging you, hey, do good, give forward, and be the change that's needed. And with that said, we'll see you next time right back here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being a part of our Supply Chain Now community. Check out all of our programming at supplychainnow.com and make sure you subscribe to Supply Chain Now anywhere you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time on Supply Chain Now.